The following is a special video presentation from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. You are watching RJ Debates 2020. Here is your host, Steve Sebelius.
Welcome to RJ Debates 2020. I'm Steve Sebelius. Tonight, we are going to be talking with a candidate for District Court Department 6. That is the incumbent judge, Jacqueline Bluth. She was appointed last year by Governor Steve Sisolak to this position and now is running for the seat in her own right. We extended an invitation to her opponent, Todd Leventhal, but he did not participate in tonight's debate. So it will just be Your Honor and myself. So first question, you've been on the bench for a little while now. Tell us what your judicial philosophy is in a way that regular people, laymen, could understand it.
Sure, absolutely. So my judicial philosophy is, I would say it in two different ways to you, Steve. I would say first, my judicial philosophy revolves around running an efficient courtroom, working hard, rolling up my sleeves, and getting to work. As you know, there's a tremendous backlog in the system. But more importantly than that, I think my judicial philosophy is sounded and grounded in the fact that when people walk through the doors of my courtroom, I want them to feel like they were listened to, that they were heard, that they were treated with dignity and respect. And even though maybe perhaps I didn't go in their way, that they still felt that, like I stated, that they were heard and that I was fair and I was just, no matter who you are, how much money you have, what color you are, what your background is. And so I would say that those two premises are mainly where I come from in regards to my philosophy.
Okay. Now, the conventional wisdom, and I'm prepared for you to dispute the premise of this question, the conventional wisdom is that prosecutors who become judges are tough on crime, or tougher on crime than perhaps a defense attorney would be. Now, I know you are endorsed by your old boss, Steve Wolfson. You worked for many years in the Clark County District Attorney's Office, both in the Special Victims Unit and in the Homicide Unit. And pretty much all of the major, I think every major law enforcement group. I don't think I saw one missing from your website today. So does that mean you're going to be tougher on crime than, say, a defense attorney would be, or no?
You know, I think it's everyone who comes to the bench. No one comes to the bench as a judge, right? Everyone comes to the bench as either a prosecutor or a criminal defense attorney, or maybe in the civil world, a plaintiff's attorney or a defense attorney. Do I come with that type of experience? Yes. I think what's really important to recognize as a prosecutor from a prosecutor background is two things. Number one, when you're a prosecutor, I don't have a client. I don't represent those victims. I represent the state of Nevada. That's a little bit different than any other type of attorney, right? If you have a criminal defense attorney, they represent their clients. Civil attorneys, both sides, they represent their clients. As a prosecutor, I represent the state of Nevada. So what I do in that role, and this is really important, and prosecutors who don't cling to this are not doing their job. Your job is to achieve justice. And justice doesn't always mean, hey, we're going to get this person for everything that they have. It means looking at the situation. What are the victim needs and desires? What is the criminal background of the defendant? And what are his or her needs or challenges in their life? It's looking at the situation globally. The second thing that I would state is, like you mentioned, look, as a prosecutor for as long as I prosecuted the whole gamut of crimes, right? So it's everything from a petty larceny to a trespass all the way up to sexual assault and murder, mainly on children. When you represent the state of Nevada and prosecuting that range of crimes, you learn that there's what I refer to as the spectrum of crimes. The people that are committing low-level offenses, they usually need services and rehabilitation. So they generally, let's say, like a homeless population, individuals addicted to drugs, veterans who haven't had services after returning from the war. Those individuals need services so that they can be rehabilitated and go back into the community. When they win, we win. But on the other side of the spectrum are the people that quite honestly should be in prison. And those are people that continually sexual assault, continually rob individuals with uses of a deadly weapon, murder individuals. It's my job as a judge to keep the community safe. And so coming with that much experience in the criminal justice system, I know where that spectrum is, and I know where people sit on that spectrum. And I always laugh because generally people do say that I'm a little bit harder on the prosecutors than I am on the defense attorneys, because look, I know what it means to do your job on that side. I know what it means to work hard. And when I don't see them doing that, I got to be honest, I'm pretty disappointed, and I'll call them on it.
You can spot a slouch.
I can spot a slouch, Steve.
Sounds great. Well, listen, we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to be back with Judge Jacqueline Bluth in Department 6 District Court, so stay with us.
Get ready for every Raiders game with us. Vegas Nation Game Day will give you everything you need to know about each week's matchup.
I'm excited.
Sundays at 9 a.m. starting in September on Your View. Vegas Nation Game Day coming this September.
All your listeners and followers, the best name of any podcast in the world is podcast.
Nobody's ever done it. Nobody's ever faked
Not that we
their
know
death.
of.
No.
When you work with Prince, you got to get used to the fact that he changes musicians like underwear. You know, like
Tom Brady.
Who?
And Tom Brady, he's a quarterback in the Boston area.
I'm not sure who you're talking about.
Welcome back to RJ Debates 2020. I'm Steve Sebelius. We're talking with Judge Jacqueline Bluth. She is the incumbent judge in Department 6 in District Court. Again, we extended an invitation to her opponent, Todd Leventhal, and he declined to participate in tonight's debate. So we are just talking with the judge on different issues. Judge, tell me this. You've been on the bench, as I said, for a little while now. Do you think, and before that were a prosecutor in the system, do you think that there is a systemic disparate treatment of people in the justice system, and I'm speaking specifically and especially people of color?
You know, it's a hard question to answer, right? I mean, I look into the courtroom and I look into the in custodies, and you're absolutely right. I do see predominantly African American males. And so I think that that question and that issue is complex. And I think that it's going to take a lot of work on both sides, but also with community leaders in discussing, hey, why are we seeing this? What can we do? Is it, you know, I spoke a lot with independent Black voters today, and he was talking about rates of poverty and how that affects the system, and how he said people who don't have sometimes have to steal. And we were talking about ways as community leaders and judges that we can work in the criminal justice system to provide education and provide opportunities. So do I think that it's out there? Absolutely. Do I think that every judge and every courtroom across the United States systematically is racist to people in their courtroom? Absolutely not. I know that I am not. But do I think that we need to go back to the building blocks and back to the drawing board and discuss these issues and work hard to make sure that people who come to court feel like it doesn't matter the color of their skin? Yeah, I'm on board with that.
You know, we were talking a little bit before tonight's discussion began about precedent and the Supreme Court. Do you think, in your opinion, that the Supreme Court of Nevada produces enough case law that district court judges such as yourself can rely upon for precedent? And if not, how can they produce more?
Oh, you're trying to get me in trouble here, Steve. So look, I think the Supreme Court and the appellate court, I think they do a great job. I think that they have a huge caseload. As a district court judge, I am always begging and more than willing to have more and more case law. I think that there are certain areas really, as both as a prosecutor and as a judge, that I would really like to see more ferreted out in the law. I think child abuse has some inconsistencies. I think medical malpractice on the civil arena, we could use a little bit more guidance. So yeah, I mean, I'm always for specific decisions that will reach widely, that we can look to for guidance. So I'm definitely for that. But do I think that the Supreme Court works really hard and tries to do the best job they can? Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about running an efficient courtroom and the backlog that's there. What ideas do you have about reducing that backlog and maybe saving some money in the process?
So, you know, I probably would have had a lot different answers pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I can't even explain to you the backlog and how nervous I am about how we're going to have to delve through that. As I'm sure you know, there are many individuals in the Clark County Detention Center who have a right to a trial within 60 days. that have not been able to have that trial because we can't have jury trials right now. I'm part of a 6-judge panel that I refer to as the COVID trial team. We meet every Wednesday, and we're discussing how we are going to get those trials back on track so we can work through this backlog. Our first trial, I believe, is set to start on September 8th. And we've set up COVID courtrooms with all sorts of technology and barriers so that jurors, defendants, witnesses, victims, judges, lawyers can all feel safe.
And be physically in the same space.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of work because we need to follow the mandates, obviously, by the governor. And you have this fine balance, right? You want jurors and witnesses, you want them to feel safe coming into the courtroom, but you also want this defendant, you want his or her rights protected as well. They need want their right to a trial. And so we have got to work hard and work through these backlogs. And that's going to mean once we get this system up and running, every single judge is going to have to be in that robe on that bench. And I have been at court on every day since COVID has started, and the courts are open. A lot of people think courts are closed. No, we are open. Our doors are open. We are still working so that justice can be achieved.
Yeah. And it would, a virtual a Zoom conversation, this is the one we're having right now, that wouldn't pass muster constitutionally with a jury, would it?
You know, I've seen a couple of different studies. I believe the first time they tried to do that was in Texas. And I think one of the jurors got up and used the restroom in the middle of testimony. So I don't think that that's the route we're going here in Nevada. I think there are some concerns about that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, Judge, I really appreciate you taking the time and your willingness to take some time to be with us tonight. Jacqueline Bluth is the incumbent judge in Department 6 of the District Court. Her opponent, Todd Leventhal, was invited but did not join us for tonight's conversation. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us.
With so much excitement building around the Raiders and their inaugural season in Las Vegas, the fans want to be heard. The launch of Vegas Nation Fan Zone is their answer. That's right, Raiders fans can sound off on all things Raiders, from players to coaches to even the new Allegiant Stadium. Vegas Nation Fan Zone is accessible 24/7 and allows fans to generate and upload their own posts for lively interaction. Simply go to fanzone.vegasnation.com to sign up today.
Renee Summerhour here with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and thank you for watching the 2020 debates. I'm here with Steve Sebelius to talk everything election 2020. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Renee.
So, the RJ has been doing the 2020 debates. We've covered, judicial debates, and now we're getting closer and closer into election. And there's a lot of questions that people have. So the first question we're going to ask today is the Nevada legislature in a special session recently passed an election law that would change the way general elections would be conducted. So what does this change entail?
Yeah, basically that change has to do with elections that take place during a state of emergency. And obviously the governor's declared a state of emergency related to the coronavirus. So this election would count. The general election will look a lot like the primary election in that every voter is going to automatically get a mail ballot sent to them, whether or not you request one or not. You don't have to request an absentee ballot. Normally you would. But under this law, you're automatically going to get an absentee ballot sent to your house, and we'll do voting by mail pretty much like we did in the primary. It won't be exclusively voting by mail, though. Voters are going to have a lot of opportunity to vote in person. There's going to be 35 voting centers scattered around Clark County during the early voting period that lasts for 2 weeks, and any voter can go to any voting site and cast a ballot there. And on election day, unlike in the primary when there was only 3 in-person voting sites, there's going to be 125 in-person voting sites on election day. So the authorities ask that if you decide you're going to vote in person rather than vote by mail, just bring your mail ballot to the polling place, you surrender it to them, and then cast your ballot on the electronic voting machines they'll have there. If you forget your ballot, you'll sign an affidavit that basically says, I'm not going to vote by mail. And so obviously you can't vote by mail and then also vote in person, because you'd be voting twice, and that's not something you should do.
Yeah, and I think that leads into my next question. The big controversy this year has been voter fraud. President Trump bringing it up multiple times, also taking action with the Postal Service in regards to mail-in voting. So again, raising a lot of questions about voter fraud, including somebody being able to vote in person and by mail. Do you think this is something that is going to happen? Do you think someone's going to be able to vote twice?
No, I don't think that will happen. The counties have very sophisticated machines that record when you vote. So if you cast a vote in person, you're listed as having voted. There was a famous case of a woman who thought it was so easy to commit voter fraud. She voted in early voting at one polling place, then drove the same day to another one and tried to vote again. Well, she got caught. The system detected that she'd already voted. Now, a lot of people say, well, hold on. What if you vote in person on election day and then mail your ballot at the same time? It wouldn't have been detected. But yes, it will, because when your mail ballot comes in, they're going to scan it. They're going to find out that this voter has already voted. And so that mail ballot will not be counted. And moreover, if you try to vote twice, it is technically a felony. Now, most of the cases that they find of this result in an honest mistake. If people think that there's two elections, for example, one in early voting and one on election day, it's the same election. And sometimes elderly people get confused. They don't realize that they mailed their ballot and then try to vote on election day. But willfully, intentionally trying to vote twice is something that A, will be detected, and B, it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to do it.
Oh, and going a little off script here, you know, the other issue with this had to do with dead relatives, right? Being able to get a ballot from someone who has passed and turn that in as if they were alive. Do you think that that's also going to be an issue?
Well, probably not, because not only there's a security feature, you have to sign the outside of the envelope. And so if the signature does not match the signature that the county has on file, then the ballot is set aside, and they will try to reach out to that voter to confirm that that person actually cast that ballot. If the signature doesn't match, they reach you either by email or by phone. You're going to have to supply government ID to make sure that your vote eventually is going to count. So voting in the name of somebody who has either passed on, or just finding a random ballot and sending that ballot in the name of someone else with a signature that doesn't match is not going to work. And they do have ways to detect fraudulent signatures as well. So even if you have a signature and you try to trace it or copy it in some way, that will also very likely be detected. So it's not as easy as people think to cast a ballot in the name of somebody else who's not you. The ballots are barcoded, there's anti-counterfeiting measures, and there's that signature requirement in place that will detect that. And it's the same thing when you go to a polling place, you're asked to sign in on a poll book. When you vote by mail, you're asked to sign the outside of your envelope. So you're signing something no matter where or how you vote.
Yeah, and we still have a lot of questions when it comes to this, including a lawsuit targeting a new voting law. We'll get back to that in just a moment.
Alexa, play my flash briefing.
Here's what's new in today's news.
Stay in the loop of the latest information in the Las Vegas Valley with the Las Vegas Review Journal Flash Briefing. Every day, we will provide you with everything you need to know in news, business, weather, entertainment, and sports. Go to the Alexa app and search LVRJ News Briefing. Then say, Alexa, play my flash briefing to hear 3 minutes of the most important information in Las Vegas.
The Vegas Nation podcast is your source for all your Las Vegas Raiders news. Subscribe and get fast takes and smart coverage. Download the Vegas Nation app, check out vegasnation.com, and stay up to date with your Las Vegas Raiders.
Welcome back, everybody. So as Steve and I continue the conversation when it comes to voting, another question I have, Steve, is about the lawsuit targeting a new voting law. What is the status on that?
Yeah, the Donald Trump re-election campaign, the Republican National Committee, and the Nevada Republican Party have sued the state over the new provisions of this voting law. They allege that There's a number of flaws with it, that ballots could be cast after Election Day, that there's different counting standards for different counties, and that disenfranchises voters. There's been a complaint filed, an amended complaint filed, and the state has made a motion to dismiss. And so we're still waiting the first hearing in that case to see how that is going to be resolved. So far, the lawsuits that have attacked the existing voting laws have not been fruitful. They've been rejected by federal courts. So we'll see how this one comes out once a hearing is scheduled.
Now, Steve, most Nevadans vote in person, usually in early voting, but also on Election Day. The June primary was the very first time Nevadans had any experience with mail-in voting. So what should voters know about that?
Yeah, there's a few things. First of all, mail voting is not some kind of second-class status. It's not like a second-class vote. Your vote counts just the same as an in-person vote. There's been a lot of talk about mail voting and how it is not as good as in-person voting. Your vote doesn't count as much. That's not true. When you fill out your mail ballot, it's important to remember a couple of things. You want to fill in the oval next to the name of the person you want to vote for. You don't make a check mark or an X or anything like that. You fill it in like a Scantron. For those of us who went to school and used the Scantron machines, you fill in the oval with your pen. If you make a mistake, you don't have to have a whole new ballot. Just cross out the name of the person that you mistakenly voted for, fill in the oval next to the name of the person you actually wanted to vote for, and that should be good. Most important though, Renee, I can't stress this enough, you have to sign the outside of your envelope. If you don't sign the outside of your ballot envelope, the ballot is going to be set aside. They're going to try to contact you, but there's a chance your vote won't be counted. So remember, very important, sign the outside of that envelope. Also, only mail one ballot per envelope. So if you have two people in your household, you can't send both ballots in the same envelope. You each get an envelope. You use individual envelopes for that. If they have two ballots in an envelope, they also set those aside. So your votes might not count that way. So only one ballot per envelope. I mentioned how mail voting is the same as in-person voting. You can check to make sure that your vote has been received. And I encourage everybody to do this. Go on the Secretary of State's website, you enter your voter information, and you'll be able to see that your ballot was received by your county. It was counted. So there's that security measure there. You can check and make sure that your vote was received. Now, if you're a first-time voter and you haven't registered, there's still time to do it before Election Day. But even if you wait till the last minute, so many of us procrastinate, you can still register and vote on Election Day, but you have to do that in person. And when you do, you have to bring ID and you have to bring proof of residency. So if you have an ID that doesn't have your current address on there, you have to bring proof of residency like a utility bill or something that'll show people where you actually live. But you can register and vote all the way up to Election Day on November 3rd. So I encourage everybody to register, vote early as much as you can, but if you don't and you wait till the last minute, you can still vote in Nevada.
Last question, Steve. In the primary, there were really long lines, and we were there on the ground looking at all these long lines. We didn't know when the election results were going to come in, and they ended up coming in very late that night. Do you think that's something that we're going to see again for the general election?
I don't think so, and here's why. First of all, this new law that was passed allows county election officials to start counting the mail ballots earlier than they ever have before. So they'll be able to start counting up to 15 days ahead of time. So all the mail that's come in every day, probably up to maybe the day before and the day of Election Day, will already have been counted. Second, unlike the primary, they're going to be using electronic voting machines during early voting and on Election Day. So those results are going to be tabulated that night. So when the election results are released on the night of November 3rd, we'll have most of the mail that has come in and all of the early voting and Election Day voting. So we'll know those numbers. The only thing we won't know is how many mail ballots are still out there and what the results of those ballots are. So the results could still change. What we know on election night isn't going to be the final unofficial tally of the election results. That's going to take a couple of days, and the county has about a week to count all those ballots. So the final results won't be there, but I think there won't be long lines because there'll be plenty of places to vote in person, so that's not going to be an issue. And I think we'll know a lot more than we did in the primary about what the election results are actually going to be.
Yeah, and of course, all that information will be on our website, reviewjournal.com. And please be sure to download the RJ mobile app for updates straight to your phone. Thank you so much, Steve, for all the information. And thank you for watching the RJ Debate 2020.